and welcome to the Automation Insider. My name's Joe McGrath with Hy-Tek Intralogistics. This week, I wanted to learn a little bit about designing more with robotic processes, and who better to do that with than my friend, Robert Schubert. Robert, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Joe. I'm excited to be here. I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So I have been with Geek Plus for about 3 years, and a lot of that time has been working on designing new solutions. I'm on the pre-sales side, and I manage our partnerships and suppliers. So a lot of what we're doing is looking at customers' data and designing solutions around their needs. So I think this will be a good conversation.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of structure the conversation today in a different way than I normally do on the podcast. And I thought it would be interesting to look at 3 different industry verticals and say, like, hey, this is an industry. This is what characterizes it. How would you design a system, or how would you go about designing a system for that particular type of customer? I think the first one that's pretty interesting to me is beverage. So this could be like soda pops. Depending on the part of the country that you're in, you're going to obviously call it something different. I'm a pop guy. This could be wine and spirits, beer. This could be convenience store products almost, right? So a lot of different mixed consumable goods. So go ahead and characterize like what that looks like to you, Robert.
Yeah, beverage is interesting. It operates very differently from a lot of our other major market verticals. So, one of the benefits of these types of systems is you can combine different storage media, different, presentation style to really change the solution around that customer's SKU base and order profile. So beverage is a kind of an extreme example. So I think it's something cool to start with, where they have some extremely fast moving inventory. They're A movers. Everybody's buying, the same few types. And then they have a ton of variety as well. There's holidays specials, and there's, different versions that come and go. You see them on the market for a little while, and then they go away forever. So it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think so some of the things that, like, especially when you have to convey any of this beverage product around, one thing that's interesting is like the wholesale version of it, or like the version of that product you see in the warehouse isn't always a thing that you can scan. I think this is if anybody that's ever like dealt with like cases of beer might find, like, there's obviously the UPC case that you can go by the store and scan it, but there's also the tray of tall boys, right? And everybody has like some version of this, it seems like, in the beverage industry, where like you can't just scan it. And I think the go-to for a lot of, classic controls, conveyor tracking is, I'm going to scan this every time and I'll know exactly what it is. But sometimes you actually don't know what it is. You have to know that from the beginning. You track it all the way through, which I think is another kind of interesting design wrinkle. If I don't have to track it, then man, that seems like a better technology. So how can we figure that out? What type of technologies? You have a whole portfolio that you obviously access, and I obviously same on my side. What type of technologies do you tend to see are really effective at dealing with beverage?
Yeah. So one of the things that most often comes up with beverage is sort of what we term pallet-to-person or shelf-to-person. So we're able to store the pallets that beverage is already using throughout their distribution network. So they're receiving a lot of times single SKU pallets. They're heavy 2,500 pound pallets, and it's kind of an efficiency play. We don't want them to put a bunch of labor on that front end and how they store it. We want to take it in the way they're receiving it and put it immediately into our system. So we're able to store that in, high bay racking. And now that reserved inventory is there and it's available. And we can automatically replenish the picking area. But really that kind of pallet to person in beverage is what I see for a lot of the fast movers. And then, as there's a lot of versions and solutions where you can do case buffer. So, now we're starting to get down into the detail of how many days of on-hand inventory does it make sense for their business to store in this facility or in this system, or, have available to pick. So that's kind of where we start seeing these combined solutions, which is really interesting.
Yeah, the case buffers are interesting. It's sort of enabled by like robotic ASRSs, I think to a very large degree. and they're great. You can kick out everything you want in the sequence that you're going to build the pallet, or it's a perfect ergonomics for some piece of labor or equipment. But you definitely have to feed the beast, right? And I think it's like a really interesting, like, sometimes these systems are split, like dropping a full pallet into a shelf level ASRS, like that replen's done, but like the picking is a little different, right? It's a little more difficult than just cranking everything down a conveyor and like it goes through a robot. So like there's this balancing act between like, how do you do that? I think there's one opportunity we worked on together where like we have a shelf field that does both. It helps manage the replenishments.
Yeah.
And you can pick out of it. So it's really like a maximum flexibility play.
Yeah, definitely. And that the other thing that I like that you mentioned is that sequencing. That has been very difficult for a long time. Sequencing is always the topic that, breaks some of these solution types forever. Having a big conveyor sequence can be really cumbersome and complicated and difficult to maintain. One of the cool kind of newer things that I'm starting to see is individual case buffering on robots to palletizers or things like that. So now it's almost like, a cross belt sorter or conveyor sections, but they're all individually a single robot. So you can bring them out of sequence and put them back into sequence. You don't have those single point of failures now for that entire case system. So that's something that is kind of cool. And I think applies to a ton of different industries as well. Sequencing is not going anywhere for store order pallets or, these pallets with wide varieties of SKUs. You need heavy items on the bottom. You need light items on the top. You need tote top off. So that sequencing problem is now made a lot easier with kind of these technologies, I think.
Sequencing is such an interesting thing. Like you can, like it used to be with enough time and money, you can sequence it. And
sure.
That's way too expensive.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, hey, let's use more robotics. And like, that's great. So you can sequence better. But when you start getting into robotic pallet building, or like automated pallet building, suddenly like you had like this okay level of like requirement for sequencing. I just need to sequence it some to get this to the person.
Sure.
But once you automate it, like the requirement for sequencing it like jumps, right?
Yeah.
And there's now we're like, we're in the realm of talking about like, well, can I have an AI vision system take a bad sequence and maybe make it kind of good for palletized, or can I just give it a good sequence? And like, there's a huge discussion of trade-offs there.
Yeah, definitely. On the vision side, I know there's a lot of companies out there and brands that have made tons of advancements in vision and mapping and building those pallets kind of out of sequence, like you said, where they have to deal with the items that they're receiving and they're trying to do that the best way. But yeah, the easiest, in my opinion, version of that is just give it to them when they need it. Yeah. But it is a cool problem, and I think it's interesting the different types of solutions now that you can use to fix that.
Okay. So that's beverage kind of in a nutshell. Like that rabbit hole is way deeper. But now I want to talk about something completely different to show kind of the versatility of some design theory. So let's talk about e-commerce. This is like the other like extreme, right? So characterize e-commerce fulfillment centers for me.
Yeah, e-commerce is interesting. So you have a really wide variety of items now, where beverage, we were talking, it's a couple of things, it's cases, it's bottles, wine, liquor, beer, there's a handful. Now e-commerce, you're open to a huge variety in SKU types. Apparel is a really, really big industry, and there's a ton of apparel systems that we have. And that's kind of one of our traditional biggest markets. Even just in apparel, I can have shoes, I can have belts, sweatshirts. I can have, hockey gear. It's a really, really wide range.
English riding boots.
Exactly. I know you
have a 38-inch case. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you need the flexibility to be able to store all of your customers' items, anything that I can buy online. So that has for a long time been a difficult thing as well. How am I designing my storage system to be the most efficient? And the ability for some of these shelf-to-person and tote-to-person systems is you can combine them. So I can have a lot of small items that do fit in totes, in the tote system. And then I can combine it with these bulky items and present and pick from the same workstation. So it's kind of a different problem than we see with beverage, but that flexibility is huge, I think, in e-commerce.
And again, like with different SKU profiles, right? So again, like you can go from a feather to a kettlebell, like maybe riding in the same package, which is really
yeah.
You have extremely large and extremely small things. Maybe we can get them to the same, like on the same shelf together. But a lot of times I see there being multiple storage mediums for the widest variety of things. Like I'm going to have, I don't know, a yoga mat, and I'm going to have a shirt. Like those probably are going to be stored in different areas.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the nice thing is now with system capability, in the last 5 or 10 years, that can all be in a single system, and we can on put away identify this yoga mat needs to go in a yoga mat size slot, and so it's making those decisions on the inbound and on the outbound. The other thing I think, I kind of want to touch on is order profile looks way different than beverage, wildly different. And now you're starting to get into questions of like, does it make sense for my business to batch pick? Is that kind of getting me that additional efficiency on the labor side where my operator, their pick rate now per presentation is way higher. But then how do I get that batch picked product into my orders? And now we're starting to talk about these solutions where there's 3 or 4 different workflows, but it's designed to meet that customer need.
Yeah, I think the really obvious example is a single line, single unit order, which is extremely common in today's e-com environment, and a multi-line or a multi-unit order, right? So I could order just socks, and everybody else would order just socks, just one pair of socks. We can all be batch picked together in the same bin from one presentation. And a presentation, I guess in this case, for those who aren't hip to the lingo, is every time a robot it brings you like one container or one location. Right. It's equivalent to traveling to a location. So how much can I grab out of every presentation? Well, a single line, single unit, you can grab a whole bunch of orders. You can grab 30 orders at a time, right? Well, kind of depends on the way. But a multi-line, you may not want to do that. Like now you're mixing a whole bunch of lines together, and somewhere in the future, you've got to take those apart. Mm-hmm. So traditionally you would do that with like a batch sorter or a unit sorter. That's cool. But you can also, and I think it's a mixed workflow thing is an excellent point. You can just go ahead and discrete pick or cluster pick those multi-lines, those multi-orders, and in the same presentation, go ahead and batch pick all your single line, single units to a different tote. And that is like, when you do the math, the modeling of systems, it's terribly effective, right?
Yeah.
So we do it very, very often.
Yeah. That's something, maybe too industry specific terminology, but hit rate is massive. Everybody talks about it. When I present something to my operator, how many things are they picking out of there? Because a lot of these systems, we've already taken tons of that non-value added time out. So they're not walking 10 miles a day anymore. Mm-hmm. That's the whole concept behind these tote to person, shelf to person, is that non-value added time is gone and we're bringing the inventory to them. Some of the other non-value added time really is like the periodic work at the workstation. So replacing my order bins, turning around and putting it somewhere and hitting the push to light, all of these are processes that are not the most efficient anyway. So that hit rate now, if I can pick 10 items out of there and 5 of them go into my batch pick bin, and then I have 5 orders that are multis and I fulfill all of those in one presentation, that operator is just even more efficient.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a kind of the other side of the coin. There's a big commercial aspect to having a really high hit rate or a badge factor or something like that. So one thing that will stop a project from happening is if it's way too expensive. And the more presentations I have to have, in general, presentations sort of drive the project cost. So if I have to have a lot of presentations, it becomes untenable. But if I can have a big fat badge factor and grab 30 pairs of socks in one shot, suddenly I have to have a lot less equipment. And that project looks amazing on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, I need less robots because I'm doing less presentations. It's pretty linear. The link between that pick hit rate and batch factor and the automation I need to support your order volume and the throughput of your building, those are pretty closely linked. Some of the other cool things that we're starting to see is, through AI and improved algorithms, we're seeing much better slotting inside of the warehouse. So putting similar items on similar shelves that we just see, if I'm buying a red pair of leather boots, I want a red matching belt. And so we put those items near each other, of course. How could you have different color belts?
Belt's got to match your shoes, right?
Exactly. It's the only style tip I know. So now we can see all of those links between items and make sure that they're stored in the same place so that when I present it, they're both there, because we see in the data and in the history of your orders, we see those kind of links and we can put them closer to each other.
That's a SKU affinity, I think is what other folks call it. And it's funny. All these ideas have like 3 or 4 names.
Yeah.
I don't know if bears word through. So this is an interesting opportunity or dilemma sometimes too. So let's say the alternative would be like, let's pick it in a rack, and I'm going to slot things to rack locations.
Yeah.
And what you can do is if you're a new engineer that's like slotting a building, I did this, I've done this. So
a lot.
You can over slot an aisle. So you can put way too much demand, like put a whole bunch of fast movers in one aisle. Yeah. All the walkies and all the operators show up at the same time, and it's a log jam, and it's a bad deal. So you do it once, and you're like, okay, I'm going to add this to my list of things not to do.
Yeah.
I think that robotic systems, or like these like good person systems, are more forgiving, but there's still this idea that you can do it, and it's called bin contention. So, and with shelves, it presents differently than with like tote-based systems.
Sure.
So in a tote-based system, everybody I can put 40,000 widgets in a bin. That's cool, but everybody needs one widget. And so I have to have this bin go to all the operators. And I don't love that. With shelves, you can kind of overslot and have that shelf. How do you solve bin contention or shelf contention overslotting? What's the...
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. You can almost design the storage to be overly efficient. It's like, I've got an A-mover rack that is going to have a hit rate and a velocity that's through the roof. And you're like, yeah, but now everyone needs it every single time. So it's almost like you need to spread out those high movers, and so that you can support the picking across all the stations. So the way that we're able to kind of identify that early in a process is we have simulation platforms that run on exactly the same software that controls them in the real deployment. We can load that inventory profile in there, the number of SKUs, the velocity of the SKUs, and we just run an entire day, of their picking. And so then we can start to see, you get kind of a heat map of every rack. And so you can see, hey, this rack, it has way too much demand on it and for it. And so you can say, all right, well, that needs to now be a few slots on a couple different racks. And we kind of separate that out so that bottleneck doesn't exist anymore. So those simulation tools, I think, are really valuable in kind of identifying those issues early in a project, rather than, because the alternative is 2 months after deployment, there's an operator sitting there and they're waiting for a rack that they have, and they just watch it, you pick it, and it comes right over to me, and then I pick it. And now someone down there needs it, and it just goes, and that rack is too popular. Yeah,
it's an interesting, like I think that simulating is like probably one of the best ways to go about it. And your simulations are great, but it's not a problem that presents itself all the time either. So in a small system, if I have like 2 pick ports, right, I'm probably not going to be contending for that shelf a lot.
No,
but in a big fast system, I bet you I am. Like everybody's going to want like that, whatever the it item is, right?
Exactly.
And one of the methods we use, or we try to be careful with the application of it, is dual slotting or making more than one location for that item. Mm-hmm. So some items, like it's not just that it's on a shelf with something else popular, it's that by itself, it is so extreme in comparison to everything else that let's spread this out a little bit. Sometimes we'll even take them out of the system if they're too unlike the rest of the product behavior. and you pick that over here, and then we'll combine it because it's just too wild. Few and far between, but absolutely a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So let's take one more shift here, and this one is going to be completely unlike the other two, right? And I think there's like very, very interesting implications on this. I spent some time thinking about this. So third-party logistics. So they ship all kinds of stuff, right? But the main difference is they're not the end customer. Like they're a customer that is essentially contracted for some set period of time to manage someone else's operation.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't sound like they would want to automate differently, but like I think in practice they do automate very differently, and they manage operations and the commercial aspects of that very differently. And it ends up looking like different systems.
Yeah.
So characterize for me if you can, Robert.
Yeah. So 3PL, so at Geek Plus, 3PL is our biggest market. That traditionally is where we've seen early adoption and widespread adoption of these types of systems. And it's different than the conversation, we've been having of exact order profile. Beverage order profile is way different than e-commerce, and why we design solutions depends on the order profile. In my experience with 3PL, a lot of it is more of like a business decision. Like you said, they're bidding on these contracts and on these new customers. So the things that are most important to a 3PL is scalability and flexibility. I need a fast deployment of a system that I can change. If I have one customer and it's only for a set period of time, and that customer goes away and I now have a new customer, I need a really flexible system because it now looks different. The profile might be different. The items might be different. Or maybe I get a new customer and I need to expand a system. That flexibility is now so important to the success and profitability really of 3PL. So it's a different conversation, but still very interesting.
Yeah. I see, sometimes we'll work with direct customers and it might be a very complicated system and has like a 5-year payback or something like that. And you're like, oh man, that's kind of rough, but they'll use it for 25 years and like it could be very profitable in the long run. And so like that's an interesting decision, and people make it and we support that. But with the 3PL, they're like, well, it's 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So 5-year payback, not interesting. Even if it's an excellent solution that would be great for 25 years, they'll never really view it or lens it in those terms.
No.
So it's I think the scale sometimes of what they choose or like what they put into scope just to try to get something that is like could be coterminously paid for.
Yeah.
Is always like an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
So what do you see as like the type of technologies, the type of processes you end up helping on those circumstances? Yeah.
3PL really, in my experience, has stuck to two types of solution, and they're basically both shelf to person. So these are ground level solutions. There's not a lot of infrastructure that you need. It's workstations, it's QR codes, and it's racks. And those racks either hold totes and they're presented to a pop pick workstation where they get really high efficiency at the operator level, which kind of to your point improves that ROI, or it's at a manual station, like we were talking, configurable shelf to person. But in general, those are so easy to change the layout, add a customer, add racks, expand it, put more robots in, get more rate. That flexibility is, I think, the key driver and why a lot of 3PLs are going in that direction. Even to the extreme of we have a lot that will move a system to a whole different building. They're expanding, they get a big new contract, but they bought a Geek Plus system. They still want to use it. They just put it in the new building. It's that flexible where a lot of automation, you're never going to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think I've talked to you about some projects where like even the floor, fire suppression, all the environmental requirements are also fairly limited. It may not be the absolute optimal solution, but man, like in 6 months, like this is pretty good. It's very effective, and you're only going to use it for 3 years and then have to move it across the town.
Right. And you have to get that ROI very quickly, because if I'm rebidding on that in a year, I can't have automation in my building that is not paid for yet. So, it's really interesting seeing 3PLs and multiple customers come and go from the same system, so they now have gotten their ROI and they bid and win and lose new business, and it comes and goes, but you'll see multiple customers in one system. You'll see customers come and go. It's really, really kind of an interesting business style compared to some of the other, customers we were talking.
It's an interesting workflow that 3PLs typically have that a lot of other folks don't, but they do multi-tenant sites. So you'll have one operation, so one set of ops leaders and one set of technology, and it could be 5, 10, 15. Like there's some boutique 3PLs that'll do hundreds of different customers in the same technology set. Do you see like a lot of different requirements levied on those systems versus the kind of pure plays?
Yeah. So a lot of what I see is in most cases, they're similar items. They're not putting wildly different styles of customer in the same facility or same building, but they're really using that deployment that they already have to leverage a customer in the same industry. So they're going out and bidding on, let's say, apparel customers, and they're showing them an apparel shelf-to-person system. So then they're able to win that contract. They're able to run more lean and have a lower price and then expand the system. And now you have multiple apparel customers all mixed in storage, and you're able to pick them separately and support those businesses on their own.
Yeah, those are interesting. I think they're the ones that are more likely to automate further.
Sure.
It's not one contract that like everything's kind of being optimized to it.
Yeah.
It's collection, right? So those are like, in the same 3PL, like that same group of engineers can behave in two slightly different ways. And it's like an important nuance.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So let's talk about the future a little bit. That was 3 very interesting case studies, I think. So anybody looking to design a robotic system, kind of think about where you are and where you need to be. But let's think about where we could go. All right. So what are you seeing as far as innovations that are kind of in the pipeline?
Yeah. So there's a couple categories that I would say we're focused on. So cost optimization, making these solutions have a short ROI is really important. Like we were saying for 3PL, they have to get that ROI because their business operates different. So we're seeing, new, more efficient designs for workstations and for robots and, things like that just help bring that ROI down. The other thing, and, I know it's a hot button topic. Everybody wants AI. Everybody's doing it. But it is something where we're able to improve these really large systems at a much faster rate than we used to, where previously you're manually kind of building these algorithms and the trafficking for the robots and where they go and why, was kind of based on a manual algorithm. Now that is changing really, really fast. And so you're seeing these optimizations in these systems that previously were unheard of, so the rate of improvement is so fast.
So you're talking kind of about like this component to all these robot systems, like it's the fleet management or the robotic management system that it sort of doles out tasks to everybody.
Yeah. It's telling what robot to go to what rack and how to get to the workstation. And it's managing this huge pool of tasks. Customers will waive, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of orders at a time. So we're managing this big pool of data. We have this big fleet of robots that has to execute those tasks. Really, that scenario, I think, is perfect for AI to help make these run more efficiently. So, we're seeing fleet sizes increase because we're handling those decisions more effectively. Our cap and some of our largest deployments now have 5,000 robots in one system. That was not possible a handful of years ago. That change and that rate and efficiency improvement due to some of these huge AI models is really impressive. The other thing is, your existing fleet is more efficient. It's handling those tasks better. It's handling them faster. And so you're seeing an efficiency improvement with the same hardware, which is something that never happened with conveyor. You put a conveyor system in, it's not more conveyor later.
You turn up the VFD, Robert, and you just
oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, you just crank it. Year 2, you just start cranking it. Yeah. So So we're seeing, a fleet that you bought a year or two ago is improving in its efficiency and its rate, which is, I think, a really, really cool thing for customers to kind of see.
Yeah, it's a sort of a wild, like, if you take a step back and look at it, like implementing AI to just tune up this task management, it drives you to both like need less robots and then also need more robots simultaneously, right?
Right.
Yeah. You're going to win business. You can now have fleets that are or fields that are capable of larger and larger fleets.
Yeah.
But even like just if you were never going to grow your business at all, like you can do it with less and less machines. And so it's cool. Like it lets you enter larger systems, like enter larger markets.
Right.
But also it pushes down, and this is like a thing that like I've seen in the last 5-10 years, and I think it's a huge thing. The barrier of entry to automating a building is getting lower and lower and lower.
Yeah,
it is happening kind of quickly. So, like you can have a very small system. It does not cost a lot of money, and it does almost everything a big system would do. Right.
Right.
It's cool.
Yeah. I mean, small, like sorting, returns processing, that can be kicked off and deployed and running and getting you that efficiency and that ROI in weeks to months. This is really, really fast deployment for these systems, and you're immediately seeing a benefit from it. Where previously, these were long design processes for new buildings and things like that. And yeah, so that is really, really cool. I had one quick point on kind of your efficiency, more robots, less robots. And it is a really funny conversation to have with a customer. They're saying, hey, our new software version that you deployed is making our system run more effectively. So we don't need more robots, but also I'd like to buy 500 more robots. And so it's like they're seeing that benefit and they're capturing it and expanding their system. So it is a really, really funny conversation to have, where normally you'd think it would end there. Like, I'd like to return 10 robots, but that's not what we're normally seeing. So it is kind of funny.
Extenuating economic circumstances, man. It changes so much of how you do planning that like now, this is why like it's tough when somebody says, hey, I want to have a 10-year like plan. Like, man,
yeah,
10 years is a long time.
It is. Yeah. Props to you if you know what's going to happen in 10 years. Please tell me, because
you should be putting some calls and puts on the market.
Exactly. Yeah. There's other things you should be doing if you can look that far into the future.
All right, Robert, thank you very much for hopping on the podcast with me. I appreciate it. This was a pretty fun conversation. I think it was pretty insightful for folks tuning in. I, again, really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it, Joe. I look forward to our next episode and diving more into the details. So this was great. Thank you.
For those following along at home, please like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or you can even find us on Spotify. And talk to you next time.